that we are absolutely committed to making sure won't reemerge in the market going forward. But today, the primary issue that's driving folks into foreclosure is not bad loans, but the effects of those bad loans on our economy more broadly, and the unemployment that I talked about that started, that really reached its depth just as the president stepped into office. And so one of the most important things that we can do as a housing policy is our jobs policy. And that's why it's so critical that over the last 14 months, we've added 2.1 million new private sector jobs. And that includes over 800,000 jobs just this year in 2011. That, I think we can all agree, for all we do to help families stay in their homes, with modifications, with counseling, with all the other things I want to talk about, making sure that we're generating new jobs, that the economy is strong as it can possibly be, is perhaps the single most critical factor in helping the broader housing market recover. Now, at the same time we've taken all of those actions, I want you to know that President Obama and I are committed to helping every single family that is prepared to do the right thing, to stay in their home, to make it work, that we are going to try to get them the help that they need. And FHA, again, has been a critical part of this success. And you don't hear this too often, but FHA has already helped, in the last 2 years, over 800,000 families stay in their homes through our loss mitigation efforts. So modifications and other help to keep those families in their homes. At the same time, we've worked with the Treasury Department to improve the Making Home Affordable program to help troubled borrowers. And I think we can all be clear that we haven't reached the number of families that we had hoped to reach initially with the program. But I think we also all have to agree that it has made a real difference. Well over 1.5 million modifications, including over 670,000 families with permanent modifications today. Now, one of the things that's been critical is that the combined efforts of FHA and HAMP have really helped to change the way modifications are done in this country. Think about this. Before the president came into office and before we started these efforts, the average modification by a servicer increased the payment of the homeowner. Not decreased, it increased the payment of that homeowner. That is fundamentally different today. And that's why we've seen, with more than 4.5 million families receiving modifications since the president came into office, a real change in the dynamic of modifications being better for homeowners and better for communities. Having said that, we can all recognize that there are many more improvements we can make to HAMP and, in particular, to the way servicers are implementing them. It's enormously frustrating to me that we still see homeowners who wait months or even a year to get a modification, that are denied for reasons they shouldn't be denied, or that as they're working to get a modification, a foreclosure process proceeds and they get that foreclosure notice just as they think they're getting close to being able to keep their homes with a permanent modification. All of these are wrong, and we are working closely with Treasury to change HAMP and to make sure that servicers comply the way that they're supposed to. But one of the most important tools we have to do that is housing counseling. Over the last 2 years, HUD-approved housing counselors have helped 6 million distressed homeowners. And this is where it's critical with modifications, a recent study by the Urban Institute showed that families are 70% more likely to be able to stay in their homes if they work with a counselor. So absolutely critical assistance that all of you that are here today as housing counselors provide. And I've seen this very, very personally. In fact, last year, I came to Atlanta with John Lewis. We helped organize a Help for Homeowners event. And as we walked in, we met a woman literally in tears who had been trying for close to a year to get her mortgage modified. At the event, she sat down with a HUD-approved housing counselor and walked out of that room able to stay in her home. In fact, John Lewis and I met her on the way out as well. And you know, she was crying again. But this time, it was tears of joy, not the tears of distress and terror that she had as she walked into the room. That is the difference that housing counseling can make. And so I know, given that I've seen it with my own eyes, the concern that you all have about what's happening in Washington on HUD's budget for housing counseling. I'm sure you've all heard that the housing counseling in our budget was eliminated under the recent budget agreement for 2011. And I know that you are enormously concerned about that. I'm enormously concerned too. I just want to be clear, we awarded $73 million for housing counseling grants to more than 500 national, regional, and local organizations from our 2010 budget. That money is still safe. It went out on the street in December, and that can continue to be a lifeline for families. That includes $4 million to 20 Georgia housing counseling agencies around the state. But the elimination of funding for 2011 is particularly painful, given the nature of the crisis we're still facing. And the president, you heard him say that while he signed that budget deal, there were a number of cuts in the agreement that he personally disagrees with. And I will tell you, this is one of them. And that's why in our 2012 budget proposal, he's proposing $88 million in housing counseling grants in HUD's budget. That would be a record level of housing counseling funding in 2012. And I will tell you, we will do everything we can to make sure that budget gets passed, including that funding, and that we get that funding out as quickly as possible. But let me also say that we need your voices on this. We need to make sure that every member of Congress, everyone who's going to have a voice in deciding what our budget looks like next year, hears from you about the difference that housing counseling can make. Because without your voices, without folks inside the Beltway hearing what a difference housing counseling funds can make outside the Beltway, we are not going to be successful in this effort. So please, raise your voices, be heard on this for 2012. Now, the other thing I want to touch on is the fact, and you all know this, you've seen it, you feel this, you know that foreclosures aren't just devastating to the families that are foreclosed and displaced. Foreclosures can be devastating to communities as well. Neighborhoods face vacant and abandoned homes, blight, and in some cases plummeting property values. Indeed, the foreclosure crisis hit so many communities that we'd all work together with community development corporations and others to help bring back over the last 15 years. Whether it's Jamaica, Queens, a neighborhood in New York City where this is really the prototypical middle-class African-American neighborhood, home of Louis Armstrong and so many others, average income over $100,000. In 2006, 50% of the loans in this community were subprime. But whether it's Jamaica, Queens, or Las Vegas, Nevada, or right here in Atlanta, what I saw, what you've seen, is not only the families feeling the shock and the pain of losing their homes, but also the disastrous impact that those foreclosures have on the surrounding community, particularly when they're concentrated in a neighborhood. That's why the $7 billion in neighborhood stabilization funding that we've provided around the country through 3 rounds is so important, and that includes more than $130 million to the state of Georgia. NSP funds are helping localities buy up foreclosed and abandoned homes, and in some neighborhoods have helped reduce vacancy rates by as much as 50%. In Cobb County, we've seen how these tools have helped communities strategically target their resources to properties that can be renewed for homeownership or can be used for affordable rental housing as well. And we've helped communities like Cobb County target their resources so that they can have the most impact in the neighborhoods that have been hit hardest. We've also worked very closely with our FHA properties to try to partner them with neighborhood stabilization. And here, Cobb County is a very good example. I'm a numbers guy. I run every month HUD-STAT sessions on our most critical goals. And in a recent HUD-STAT meeting on our goals on foreclosure relief, Ed reported to me that almost 3/4 of the homes that Cobb County has bought with its neighborhood stabilization funds have been FHA homes at a significant discount. And what that means is that with that partnership, you will have the ability to help your communities recover more quickly. But we're not just limiting this effort to FHA-insured properties. We created, with so many folks who are in this room, national nonprofits around the country, we have created a First Look partnership. It includes Enterprise, who is a sponsor of this effort here today, but also the National Council of La Raza, the Urban League, and many other national nonprofits. And the fundamental idea here is in too many places where foreclosures have been concentrated, you may have a half dozen or even a dozen foreclosed properties on one block or in one community, and yet they're serviced by a half dozen or a dozen different servicers. And it's almost impossible under the old system for you to get control of those critical properties on that block because the ownership of them is so dispersed. First Look changes that. We negotiated with all the major institutions. They control 75% of all the REO in the country, an exclusive 12 to 14-day window for our NSP grantees to evaluate and bid on their REO. All told, we expect NSP to allow us to purchase up to 100,000 properties in the nation's hardest hit markets. And in those specific targeted areas, that represents more than 20% of all the REO. So if we do this right, if we work together in partnership, we can make a real difference in your communities. First Look has already allowed, with our partner, the National Community Stabilization Trust, has given communities an exclusive window to purchase 70,000 REO properties just since we stood up First Look. 188 different communities have benefited, and the average discount that we've seen is about 13% from what they otherwise would have sold for through First Look. First Look is, I think, exactly the kind of game-changing, market-oriented, and cost-effective approach that the piece-by-piece partnership is all about. It's game-changing in the sense that instead of having to figure out the 10 to 20 next properties that you're going to buy from a range of different servicers that are going to be scattered across a city or a metropolitan area, we can focus on a block, on a street, getting all the properties that are critical to allowing you to really change the game on that road, on that street, in that community.